Christine Largy, thank you so much for joining us today for an episode of Limitless.
Pleasure, I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. Christine, I've been looking at your bio and it's super impressive. Now, your career started in blue chip. Can you just kind of give an explanation as to why you went into conventional industry?
Yeah, I was lucky. I had an amazing teacher at school who was terribly concerned that I was sort of like not on the straight and narrow. And she introduced me to somebody at John Lewis Partnership. And that, I think, was the best introduction I had in my life. I worked for them for 5 years and just learned so much about leadership, ethical leadership, integrity, decision-making, and being accountable. I mean, I think that's the best thing that I learned in John Lewis Partnership was around you make a decision as a manager and it's like your staff and everybody else in the organisation has the right to ask you why and you need to give them a really good answer. So, and I was lucky to work for a chap called Brian O'Callaghan, who was the general manager, and he sort of plucked me out of obscurity and gave me a hugely public job working directly for him. And it was just way outside my comfort zone. It was way outside my area of expertise. But he invested a lot of his reputation. And when I did fail on something, which is of course the thing that I have learned the most in my life from that experience, he took the flak. You know, he made it his job to make sure that I didn't fail. So I was just really lucky that I started off in such an incredible organisation. And then I decided that you sort of had to work a long time at John Lewis to get promoted, and I was a woman in a hurry. So I went off actually and worked for a number of different, much smaller organisations. So got quite big roles quite young. So even at 26, I was running a department store of 20,000 square foot, 250 people. So at 26, that was quite a big responsibility. But again, I was really lucky. The chairman of that company just thought, no, I think she can do this. And everybody else on the board is going, oh, she's a bit inexperienced. He's going, no, I won't let her fail. And he used to come and see me every Saturday morning and we just have coffee and a chat. So I think I was just so lucky throughout my whole career that I just had these people who sponsored my development. And then I worked for some much bigger organisations like the Burton Group. So that was a learning in itself. I mean, I think what I learned most from that is just resilience. So it doesn't matter whether you agree or you disagree. You have to be true to yourself and just not take it personally. You know, just be resilient and just keep going. You know, I think it was Churchill that said, part of success is just turning up. And it sort of like rather felt like that. I just had to get on with it. And then I ended up in Sears in warehouse as their retail ops director, and I just loved that organisation. It was full of young women who just wanted to learn. They were like sponges. And it was just a joy to work with these women who were just so vital and enthusiastic and passionate about what they did and very fashion intelligent. It was a great business. And then, you know, finally at Superdrug, which was, you know, I did actually say to the headhunter, I think you've got the wrong Christine Largy here. And she said, no, you know, they need an agent of change and you are that person. Well, of course, the issue is one person cannot change a huge organisation like that. So it was a very tough business. But it was really enjoyable because we did make real progress in just changing some of the perspectives. So, for example, when I walked in there, one of my area managers came to me and said, Christine, do you realise you have a completely different vocabulary from us? And it's like, do I? Give me some examples. And he said, well, we talk about Saturday girls. And you talk about the Saturday team. And it's like, you know, the reality is there are boys and girls in that team, but they're all called girls regardless of their gender, which was a bit weird. And yet all the managers were called guys. So again,
the girls had the part-time jobs.
Yes. So, you know, it was girls on the shop floor and the guys were the managers. And actually, there were a lot of boys on the shop floor.
Old habit vocabulary continued.
Exactly, just a language that carried on. And in fact, I got accused there of sex discrimination in reverse, because apparently what I was doing was sacking all the men and promoting all the women. And actually the reality of what I was doing was simply promoting assistant managers who were the people doing all the work, and they happened to be women. I mean, the men moved on for whatever reasons, the men moved on. So I could see why somebody from the outside might get that impression, but all I was doing was recognising who are the people actually doing the work here? Who are the people on the shop floor that really are interacting with the customers, rather than the manager who was perhaps in the office, you know, counting the money or whatever it was they were doing. So I was just very lucky throughout my career to, first of all, have some amazing leaders that I learned from, and then put in some very challenging situations. And it is those challenging situations where you learn the most, for sure.
Undoubtedly, and I think we've been speaking this afternoon about failure, and you spoke about taking those risks and having advocacy, and sponsorship. I know that you're passionate about that. That breadth of experience was clearly great grounding, because you moved to Harvey Nash, probably recognised as being one of the world's, globally, one of the best executive search organisations. So you went almost as a poacher, turned gamekeeper, from being clearly on the blue chip commerce side, moving into now finding great talent to go and help other organisations. Why that move?
So I had come out of Superdrug. And I was originally working for myself because it was at the time of the dot-com boom. It was like first to market, got the market. And I'd done a lot of work in my retail days, both in department stores and in the supermarket style, about navigating customers around a physical store. And actually what I learned very quickly in the dot-com era in 1999, was that you'd ask the board, so who is your key customer? And they go, well, Christy, it's the World Wide Web. It's everyone. It's like, okay, let's just think about the customer journey here. If they're teenagers, they're like magpies, young women, and when they start having babies, and then older women come back into the high street. So let's think about what you need to do to attract really who your customer is going to be here. So I did a lot of work on customer navigation around .com, and through that work I got to meet some people at PA Consulting. And then I met some people who did their original executive search business and their interim business. I met the leader of that business, and he said, well, why don't you come and join us? So it was like, well, at the time 2000 had just hit, so the .com thing was people were suddenly going, oh crikey, we've just put all this first and second round funding in, we're not getting any money return from that. So the market was beginning to tighten up. So it's like, okay, this is an offer on a plate, why wouldn't I try it? I even had to say when they interviewed me, but what do you want me to do? I don't know what you do. What do you want me to do? But it was just yes, because why wouldn't I? It's something new.
Well, when you were sharing the start of your career, you sort of said you were a woman in a hurry. And then just what you're describing now, and even just your animated style of the passion that you clearly felt for it, you seem someone who has an appetite for risk. Is it calculated risk, or is it, hey, this is unknown and it's quite exciting?
I think internally I would say it's more about necessity. So I think I took a view that, well, I think the .com world is going to come to a bit of a grinding halt. Here's an offer on a plate. I may not know what it looks like, but I've got nothing to lose. Right. So I think it's more around having nothing to lose and just being very curious. So of course there is a certain amount of concern about the unknown, and we all quite like to control our world and know what's going to happen. But I think that actually, as Farah was saying earlier, it's how you frame it. So if you are feeling anxious, the physiology of your body, what's happening with your hormones, what's happening with your blood pressure, what's happening is exactly the same physiology as when you're excited. So just change the word to excitement. And that for me helps me sort of think about it in a positive way as opposed to a fearful way.
I think that's great advice for any listener who's thinking, that sounds exciting, I've got a career opportunity, I'm a little bit fearful perhaps of doing that, I've got imposter syndrome. You spoke of mums returning to the workforce, just to change that little narrative in our minds into, I'm not frightened of this, I'm quite excited by it.
I think you've got to overlay that with curiosity. Being able to go into a room and say, tell me about this. I can remember in one of the department stores, not John Lewis, another department store I worked for, I was promoting their fashion business. They were very much a household-led business. And I can remember talking to the store director of one store and saying, look, you absolutely know more about this business than I do. But what I'd like to ask you, said, Christine, let me give you some advice. In this business, don't ever say to anybody that you don't know about this subject. So it's like, oh, okay, that was quite interesting, but that was good advice actually for that business, because you had to have a certain degree of positional power. But actually through my career, I think that where I've always come from is I'm just really curious. Just tell me more about this, tell me about that. So you don't have to be the expert in something, you just have to be curious enough to ask lots of questions so that you actually find the information. So even when I'm going into a situation that I'm uncertain of, it's like, well, you know what, it's not going to be the end of the world. And I just want to know more. I'm curious.
Yeah, I think the curiosity factor is certainly one thing. You were describing what your former colleague had said to you. It almost sounds like that adage of, fake it till you make it. And I think there's probably some industries where that's less risky. I can't imagine that being a characteristic that's suitable for the boardroom. And I know that in your tenure at Harvey Nash, you were placing people on boards for organisations. Clearly you're looking for authentic leadership, and one would make an assumption here that through your selection process you're looking for tried and tested experience. How do you weed out the fake it till you make it versus the actually, do you know what, this is someone who's perhaps square peg in a round hole, but this board needs this?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
So the problem is with the bit about the technical competence bit, because the trouble is, from an executive search perspective, as soon as you let the client get into this long list of technical requirements, you're already pushing out half the population. So if you have a client who says they must have an engineering degree, with the best of the world, they're not going to get an awful lot of diversity of thought here. So one of the first things that we have to do with an executive search is actually go, okay, can we actually just concentrate for a moment on what is the criteria that you're actually looking for? So let's say it's critical thinking skills. So then that opens the world up to all sorts of different people. So that's the first thing, is to get clients to actually think about it from a, what it is they actually, the criteria, not just a long list of technical requirements. So I think that's one thing. And then I think the other thing that we, within an executive search world, we're trying to put the science into it. So that what we're saying to clients, okay, we know what the criteria are. So how will you know what good, better, best looks like? And what are the questions, by the way, that you're going to ask each and every candidate so that you know that their answer is the good, better, best, and then actually you can score them out of 10. So then this notion that you get this phone call going, well, Christine, seen all the candidates and we're going to go with this candidate. Oh, that's interesting, because actually on my scoring, they didn't score as highly as this candidate over here. Yeah, Christine, it's personality fit, it's chemistry fit. We said, no, that wasn't our criteria. So, we've got a lot of education to do to help people put some science into the appointment process. So I think that's really, one of the challenges that we're sort of always sort of like working with. And it's just education. It's having conversations and just trying to move the debate on.